I was a high school English teacher for 15 years, also an elementary teacher. So when I finished my dissertation work and went into higher education, I had expected that I would be able to be a force for positive change in those K-12 schools. Unfortunately, what's happening is the changes, the colonization of our practice is quickly wending its way into higher education and limiting my practice to work with future teachers. Well, in higher education, there are a couple of ways in which it affects our practice. The first way is that students are going into classrooms that are significantly impacted by high stakes examinations. So they're seeing instruction and experiencing instruction that is almost exclusively standards-based unless they are in a private school. Secondly, most of the students we're getting in teacher education programs, if they've come from public education, they themselves know no other way of understanding school, which makes it hard to awaken their imaginations to that kind of understanding of teaching and learning. And third is, now that high stakes assessments are coming into the student teaching realm, they will be expected to complete a high stakes assessment that will not be scored by their teacher educators, such as myself. It will be sent and scored to some calibrated scorer who is not allowed to know the student. So they're learning that teaching is something that can be easily measured and assessed by a stranger. And teaching is deeply contextualized. It's work that is profoundly human. It is physical, it's social, it's psychological, it's emotional, and it cannot be reduced to a number. And so students are coming to understand teaching as something that's very different from what it should be. I love teaching. I believe there is no more important work than teaching. And I'll be damned if I let some corporate entity determine a path that is the right path that I should lead students along. I believe teaching is dialogic, and I believe that we should follow the students more than we lead them. In my dissertation study, I looked at 11th grade students who were in an inner ring suburban high school in Western New York. And I looked at their practices of writing, because writing is a very important way of empowering students. So when I did the dissertation research, I interviewed 21 students as well as 21 teachers across the 4 content areas of English, social studies, science, and math. And what I found was very disheartening. Virtually all of the writing that students were doing in grade 11 was formulaic, predicated on the structure of the 4 tasks that they had to complete as part of their English Regents examinations in the state of New York. When I asked students to try to think of a time when they wrote based on their own thoughts and feelings, a few of them were able to harken back to 8th or 9th grade. John Dewey said something along the lines of, one of the challenges of educating students is that we're preparing students to not just live in, but to create a world that does not yet exist. So it requires radical imagination, and it requires us to teach students much, much more than compliance or rote memorization. We need to teach students to be active in creating themselves and creating the world. One of the big fallacies that is driving the education reform movement is the idea that schools are failing. If we look at schools across international rankings and we disaggregate those data and look at poverty, our students who are middle class and wealthy do as well or better than any other schools in the world. The problem in our nation is not our schools, it's our poverty. We have very high rates of poverty for an industrialized nation. It benefits corporations such as Pearson to think that schools are failing. For example, Race to the Top, New York State filled out a grant and competed to try to get it. When we got the grant, half of that money immediately went to the creation of a data system, which went to a private corporation. The other half was distributed among schools, but it was going to cost far more to implement the policy than schools will get to implement that policy. So Race to the Top costs schools money, but benefits the corporations that, for example, create the data programs, create the assessments that link to the Common Core. In keeping with the fallacy that our schools are failing is the fallacy that education as a field doesn't really exist, that we need to be pressured from the outside in order to improve. And for example, the creators of the EdTPA have been going around the nation saying that this exam will make us a profession. that is infuriating to me because I have spent my life in this profession. I don't need an assessment that is incurred during student teaching to tell me that my work is good and important. Teachers tend to be people who believe in the education system. It has worked for us. It has worked well for us, especially those of us who have earned our terminal degrees. We believe in the institution. So it's very hard for us to be as deeply critical as those of us who are here have become. It undermines much of what we act on and much of what we had hoped to believe in when we did this work. I feel betrayed to have to do this work. I feel sad to have to do this work, but I feel enraged by the corporate interests that are forcing me to do this work, and I feel a tremendous obligation to future teachers and to their future students that sustains me in doing this work. Reclaim the conversation on education. We can do this.